welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch, sponsored by Masters Restaurants in St. Louis, 5 locations. It's stlmasses.com. They're the title sponsor. I'll talk about them a lot here in a little bit, but I want to get to my guest today. It's Steve Langford. You remember him from Howard 100 News, Current Affair hard copy. Steve, hello, and how are you? And what a nice background.
And what a nice what?
Background you have there.
Oh, yes. It's, a beautiful day here in New York. Listen, thank you for having me on.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to now. We'll start with that. Again, I became aware of you. I think I remember you from hard copy back in the day because I did watch that. That was on every day. But what is Steve Langford doing these days to keep himself busy?
Well, I'm a reporter for Newsday on Long Island, which has expanded in a big way into video, online video. And so I do what I've always done, is tell news stories, report them and tell them. But it's online and it's at a organization which has an incredible history. I really like it.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your days, just as you think back to your days at Howard 100. Tell me a little bit about what you think of when you think of those days.
Well, it was a great opportunity. It was a great match because, as you alluded to, I worked in tabloid news. I worked in a lot of news, not only in America, but I worked in France, I worked in Canada. And I like to tell a story colorfully with a lot of energy. And so Howard 100 News was perfect for because the subject matter was often exciting. Sometimes it was very serious. Sometimes it was just completely ridiculous. But I was allowed to tell stories the way I believe they should be told, and that is with a lot of color and passion. So I really liked it.
When you hear of this opportunity out there, what's your first thought? Is it, this can't be real? What are they going to be doing? Tell me a little bit about when you hear about it and how it's presented to you and how you decide, this does sound like something that's actually going to be something that I can do for what you did it almost, 7 years there, right?
6 years, yes. What happened was when Howard was within a few months of going to satellite radio from K-Rock in New York, he gave an interview to the New York Times. He gave a lot of interviews, but one to the New York Times, which I read every day, worship that news organization. He said in it that he wanted to start a news team. And I thought, what the hell? Whoa, wait a minute. So I contacted a couple of people who I thought might have contact with Sirius or with Howard or something like that, and never expected to hear anything. And then I got a phone call one morning. And they said, listen, can you come in on Monday and see us? I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And I stayed 6 years.
So what was that? What was those early days like? Because from what I remember, the news team kind of came on the air before Howard even could go on the air. He started at 1906. Everybody remembers that. But Sirius, his channels kind of went live, I believe, September, October. And the first thing I think people heard was like Ralph Howard and this news team. And you guys start reporting. So give me just that background of just that starting. It's basically a startup news company with a startup Howard Stern channel that most startups don't get this sort of backing, but that people are going to be listening.
Yeah, it was extraordinary how people listened. We got there. We were mostly hired around the same time, a bunch of us. And my attitude was, and I don't go into every job like this, but in that job, I knew exactly what to do. Just tell stories with a lot of color. And so I didn't ask anybody what to do. I just did it. And it was great because it was a blank slate. And by and large, nobody ever said anything about, how you're supposed to do it. I knew how to do it, and I did it. Not everybody liked it, but that's the way I do news. So one of the first memories of being there at the beginning, it was only a few days in, and we were jammed in this tiny little newsroom on the 36th floor at Sirius. And we had not met Howard Stern yet. None of that I know of. I certainly have. And Howard Stern and Ed Bradley march into this tiny room. And Ed Bradley says, well, Howard, what's going on here? And Howard says, well, this is actually our new news team. We just hired these people, and they're reporting on everything going on in the world of Howard Stern. And Ed Bradley says to Howard, as the cameras are rolling, well, what are they reporting on right now? And he said, well, actually, I think they're reporting on something called the Craptacular that we're doing live. There's a man in an apartment in Queens. And, well, to make a long story short, we're having this man fed live on the air, live on Howard 101, I guess, for 24 hours straight. We're feeding food as we can, and we have a portable toilet in the apartment, and we're going to see how much he can produce. And we're all betting on how much he will produce. And Ed Bradley looks at him as the cameras are rolling and goes, well, what exactly is so funny about that? At which point, even the camera guys couldn't hold it together. They were laughing so hard. It was great.
And I remember early on, Howard was promoting this as we're going to have yellow jackets and they're going to be in a van and they're going to have the satellite, but they're not reporting on me. How hard was it early on to want to do a story about him and Beth going to the Hamptons or whatever Artie's up to? I mean, how off limits were some of the people that were actually on the show a lot, like Howard, Robin? I don't think there was many Robin stories.
Obviously, we weren't as stupid as we looked. We didn't investigate Howard. Though there were stories we reported on him, and I don't think he was always pleased with what we did. But we basically had free reign to report on everybody, perhaps other than Howard. It's not like Howard said you can't report on. It's just we didn't investigate the hell out of the guy, but we did go after and reported a lot on all the other people on the show, and they were not always happy with me.
Do you have a favorite moment from that when someone was not happy?
But you may remember the Robin Quivers, Jim Florentine romance. And, I mean, we actually put a promo on the news because we wanted to report on this developing story. What was going on with these two. It was a great story. I mean, Florentine is an amazing comedian. Robin Quivers is an extraordinary individual who's not always easy to get along with, but really an amazing human being. Anyway, they were dating, and so we put a promo on Howard 100 News. We're covering the romance, the budding romance of Jim Florentine and Robin Quivers. If you see anything happening anywhere, call us on the Howard 100 News tip line, 877, whatever it was. And we got calls from everyone. Everything they did, we got a call on. And Robin was not too happy with that.
How? I mean, you guys were, reporters. You guys really were, news reporters. You had that background. So again, you talked about the Craptacular. Like, there's no party that goes, "What am I doing?" Or is it like, "This is great. This is exactly what I want to be doing"?
Well, listen. I mean, in the day and age of people have to cover the Trump White House, what's the difference?
But back then it wasn't that back then though. I know now.
Back then it was the Bush White House.
Who was your favorite whack packer? I know you got actually emotional when Kenneth Keith died. I think in jail.
Oh, I just knew in my gut the moment that happened. I got a phone call. There was a bit of a backstory to it. I had never met Kenneth Keith. He was on the show a lot before I was there. I was aware of him getting in legal trouble in Pennsylvania, and I went only a couple of weeks before his death, and covered a court hearing in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, I think it was. And he showed up. He was brought in by a cop, and he looked like death. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? He had been in this private prison for a couple of weeks, I guess. And I said to his attorney after, I said, are you going to get him medical attention? I'm no doctor, but he does not look good. Oh, yes, of course, we're going to. About 2 weeks later, I get a phone call at 7:30 in the morning saying that Kenneth Keith had died in that private prison. And it just hit me. something really, really wrong about this. And I was, it just, I didn't know the guy, but I got really emotional about it. And I actually waited before I took it into Howard because it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong in my gut. And we reported the hell out of private prisons after that, I can tell you.
And then also, I was a huge fan of this era when Artie came in 01, and then you guys go to Satellite, and it was just hilarious. But everyone has to obviously understand that Artie, there's something going on with Artie, but Howard doesn't want to talk about it. Tell me how hard it was to sort of not be able, I know even Lisa G was saying, I have a file, and I'd be interested to hear about that file, I guess. But tell me what you thought about those days where, Artie's falling asleep, he's not showing up, and everybody's asking these questions. Can the news team find out? How is it to deal with all that?
Well, up until the end, we reported everything that we knew. And Artie was not happy always with that. And maybe, who knows, Howard may not have been happy with that. But we reported him extensively. Then Howard took, and he was concerned about, Artie is for us, Artie was a news story, and we covered it aggressively.
Well, and what was it like just seeing him sort of, I have to say, deteriorate,
Well, it was Artie, even in good days, really liked to control. He didn't like being covered by somebody like me because I would report what happened. I reported what I saw, and he didn't care for that. And it was not always flattering, obviously. I mean, I remember one time toward the end there where he was doing an appearance in Philadelphia, a book signing, I think. And I went over to Hoboken, I think, and there was a party bus, so we were supposed to leave, and the book signing in Philadelphia was, say, 7 o'clock or something like that, and 6 or 6:30 or something, and Artie's clowning around, and we're not actually going to the book signing. We got hundreds of people waiting for him at a bookstore in Philadelphia, and I'm just like, what is this? Is this the way you treat your fans? And I reported that.
I mean, everybody now is wondering, where is he? I'm sure you probably don't have a chance to talk to him or have his number, but you are a hard-scrabble journalist. You got to find out where he is, Steve. What do you know about him? Do you know anything about him? What was the last contact you had with him? And where is he? What can we do? He showed up doing a podcast, nose all messed up, and now we don't know where he is.
I have no idea. I mean, I covered the Stern Show when I was there, and now I don't cover that beat anymore. So I don't know. And Artie and I were obviously not friends.
It's a national news story, though, Steve. No, I'm just kidding. I just worry about him, honestly, because, again, I'm a fan. He did come through here a few times. We hung out. But, yeah, that's my thing. George Takei was another one. You got the chance to cover a lot. I know you really have a special place for him because of some of the stories you got to do with him. It became more of a thing. This would be one of those where you could say, listen, this is way out of the Howard Stern universe. I could do this at any time. Tell me a little bit about that relationship.
So one day, George would be there at the show, and he was funny as hell, and, he was a great, great man, is a great, great man. But I read something about, we knew in the background that he'd been imprisoned in an internment camp in the West during World War II as a Japanese American. And then I read this line that he and his family, when he was 5 years old, before they were sent to the camps, they were forced to live in a horse stall at a racetrack in Los Angeles. And that just hit me. I went and saw George, and I said, what on earth would... And it occurred to me that we could do, because radio is easier than television in terms of production, we could do a documentary about his childhood. And he agreed. And so I went to Los Angeles. I spent an entire day with him and Brad, his spouse. And we drove around Los Angeles to all these locations. We went to George's home, where the Takei family had lived in April of 1942. Nice little home in East LA, I think it was. And George had not been back since that time. And just like U.S. soldiers banged on the door in April of 1942 and told the Takei family at gunpoint, "You're coming with us," because they were Japanese American. We banged on the door. There was a gentleman who opened the door somewhat bewildered, like, what are these people doing? And why is George Takei at my door? But George explained very clearly that, I lived here in 1942. This is where U.S. soldiers took us. And could we come in? And the man said, of course. And so, it was extraordinary to see and to record and to George reliving that. And then we went all around Los Angeles to the downtown where they put them on buses. They took them to a native racetrack where George and his family lived in a horse stall like animals for several months before being taken on trains with the blinds down so that nobody could see them and they couldn't see out, and they were taken to prison camps in Arkansas and Northern California, I think it was. So I did a radio documentary about that, and I was very proud of it.
Yeah, that's really enterprising journalism, as they say. But you don't get a lot of those kind of stories when you work at the Howard Stern Show. What is a day, a week like there where you guys come in on a Monday or maybe you have a meeting on a Thursday? Here's what we're going to cover. How does the news team decide? You guys you got to come in every day and have a news update. You and Lisa G were basically the two guys, or two news people coming in and doing that. What is that like? You're just sitting on the phone all day, and are you listening to the show, and is someone pitching you? Jason, I'm sure Jason Kaplan probably just threw you stuff to do because he was one of those gossip guys. But
you're listening to the show a lot because a lot of material comes out of that. Well, we didn't deal with Jason so much, but Gary Dell'Abate, for example, was enormously helpful. This is a guy who is not only a very generous human being, great guy, but he also understands journalism and he knows material. And so we would listen to the show. We would get calls. We'd get tips. We had that Howard 100 News tip line. We got tips like crazy on that thing. The Stern Show is very devoted and involved audience. Gary, reminds me of a story like one afternoon as we're churning out material all day long. And one day, Gary calls me and says, I don't know whether you'd be interested in this story, but, I'm going to run for a position on the town council in Greenwich, Connecticut, where I live. And I just, in my gut, I knew immediately. I think I knew more than Gary knew that this was going to be a great story. And so sure enough, Gary says a couple of weeks later, he says, listen, we're having this meeting where I'm going to introduce myself to the people on the town council in Greenwich as I run for this position on the Parks and Recreation Commission. So would you like to come and cover it? And there'll be a reporter there from the Greenwich paper and, whoever else wants to cover it. I said, yeah, absolutely. And I have my microphone. Everybody knows I'm a reporter. And Gary gets a question from one of the council members, a woman who says, Mr. Dell'Abate, I've been reading up on your background. And I understand you're with the Howard Stern Show. Now, it seems I've learned that included in your duties, at one point you were throwing lunch meat at a woman's rear end. Well, I'm holding the microphone, trying not to cry, because it was so surreal and funny. And Gary is like, I'm going to try to explain this. And I knew right away that this was absolute gold. So sure enough, the next day on the Stern Show, it was. And I covered the story from there on. It was just extraordinary.
That is hilarious. So you're coming in to be the news guy, but when do you realize that you're going to be part of the show as well? Like they're going to be fodder. There's going to be times where they're going to have Steve. You're going to be part of it, and not just be the news guy. Was that right away? Like, hey, be ready. You're going to be. You're not only being the news guy. You're going to be a character like Robin and Artie and Fred. Steve's going to be over here. We're going to do stuff with Steve.
Well, going in that anything they know about is going to happen on the air. It's not scripted. To my knowledge, it was never, nobody ever handed me a script. But my attitude going in was, we're the news team. We just cover it. We're not stars. We're not in the same league as all these people on the Stern Show. We simply come in and cover the news, and that's it. Now, that said, because of the audience, you become somewhat well known. I remember one day somebody said, listen, can you call Leslie West from the rock group Mountain and just see if we can find him on here's a phone number and see if we can get a quick interview with him. And you know, I'm of that. I remember Woodstock and Leslie West from Mountain. Like, holy crap. So I call this number and I go, Mr. West? Yes. I go, my name is Steve Langford. I'm a reporter. Steve, how are you? And I said, wow.
It's pretty cool. But on the converse side, you've got Richard and Sal, and I'm sorry, this you do have this call from Sour Shoes that comes in that's not actually Sour Shoes. Can you laugh about that now looking back? Because I mean, this thing was played over and over.
Yeah, I know. I often tell Gary that, you know, I did 6 years of a lot of really great reporting, and the only damn thing they play is that alleged prank phone call.
What was that like? I mean, to know that they got you, and not only did they get you, it's, you know, some people do a practical joke and then it's over, but this thing is going to be played now I mean, you just hear Sour Shoes.
Well, listen, you know, worse things have happened on that show, but I got to tell you, you know, I like pranks, and I mean good pranks. I often said that, you know, calling me 300 times while I'm trying to get my work done is not necessarily a prank. In fact, I asked Howard at the time, I said, okay, this is really funny. Give me your phone number, Howard, and I'll call you 300 times over the next couple of weeks, and we'll have a great laugh about it. But like a real prank, it seemed to me, was the time when Artie and Ronnie pranked me amazingly. And that is, I'm standing the cue each day when I had to come in and do the headlines on the Stern Show, was I would stand outside the studio and simply listen to the show. And all of a sudden, Howard out of the blue would go, Steve Langford's coming in now with the headlines. I'd have to race in. So one day I'm standing there at the door with my script and I'm listening to the show. And Ronnie goes from across the hall in Scott's studio, goes, come here. And I go, no, I think Howard's going to call me right. Oh, come on, just come for a second. So he wants to show me something 10 feet across in Scott's studio. Little do I know, Scott hits a button, a tape that says Steve Langford's now coming in with a Howard 100. So I go, whoa! I go racing into the studio, and I put the headphones on and go, and Howard's in the middle of something, and he goes, Steve, what's up? I mean, you're welcome to be, but what's the occasion? What? And he could tell from my face, and he goes, what's the matter? And I go, I've been had. And he goes, who did this? I want names. At which point I thought it was the funniest thing on earth. And so he hauls Ronnie in. He's got Artie in there already, and he starts screaming at them for 10 minutes. Obscenities. Just, he went nuts. And at first I was laughing, and then finally he was so mad I stopped laughing. But I thought that was a great prank.
And I do remember you spent a lot of time in that hallway, right? Like that was kind of the worst part. You don't even know, right? When you're coming in and then
you'd wait for 45 minutes like this. You know, oh, wait a minute, he calls. I got to go in and I got to deliver this news, and there's no place to put your paper. You got to put the headphones on and hold on to your papers. You know, but it was a great opportunity.
I was gonna say, did you enjoy your time? Because it feels like it's such a locker room. And again, with this news department, the news people seem very like, hey, we are news people. They again, Penny Crone. I wanted to ask about her. So she, you know, she wasn't there long, right? But was she let go, or I can't remember. But it seemed like she couldn't handle it. It was almost like, what did I get myself into?
After she was very fun. I mean, she had a long history covering the Stern Show, even when she was Channel 5 here in New York. But you know, it required a lot of work. And Penny liked to be more of a personality on the show. But covering the news is a lot of hard work. You know, covering the news, like going and doing the story, getting it, writing it, producing it. And she kind of thought she was more of sort of a star. And when they cut back, they didn't need everybody after the initial period there. She and other people were let go.
Yeah. But that what I was kind of getting at was that there's this locker room feel, and it's just, you know, people can say and do what they want, and Sal's wearing a mask, a Baba Booey. I mean, it's just literally like a place people, I think in my 20s, I'd be like, this is where I want to work. And you're here trying to do news. Like you said, you're getting pranked. I mean, did you feel miscast, or did you really kind of enjoy kind of being in that kind of that locker room area?
Well, it was tense sometimes because it was crazy. But keep in mind, I was a big Stern fan before I went there. And so I knew a lot of what the show was about, and I loved it. I mean, it was and is a great show. Howard Stern is the most successful revolutionary in the history of radio. He reinvented the medium, one man, and he did a hell of a job. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I loved Top 40 radio, which in many ways was the antithesis of what Howard does. I worshiped Top 40 radio, but I also appreciated what Howard did beyond.
Did you have a lot of meetings with Howard? I mean, does he want to be? No, nothing.
No.
How was your relationship with Lisa G when you worked there? And now it's like, the two of you are really the two that kind of got kind of big because you came in every day.
Listen, we sat beside each other. We got along just fine. But we were very different. I mean, her reporting, my reporting was they were very different, those styles.
So tell me, we talked about George Takei, but I think that was part of the reason what happened for you not to stay there longer, right? So I think there was a moment where maybe your daughter wanted to do. Tell me a little bit. Okay, well, yeah, let's clear that up then. So what brought this period in your life to an end?
No, in fact, no. That had absolutely nothing. No, I'll explain that, but no, that had absolutely nothing to do with me leaving. The reason I left is that my sense was that Howard was losing interest in the news team. And that is his right. It is his show. It is the most successful show in the history of radio. So I had 5 or 6 really good years there. But wherever I work, if I get a sense that there's so much interest in what we do anymore, I want to move on. So that was the single reason why I left. I'm not sure they were pleased when they knew I was leaving, but it was time for me to go. But in terms of the George Takei thing, I mean, listen, part of it's shtick. Who the hell knows? But Howard said something about, I asked George if my young daughter could interview him briefly on the phone about the internment camps. And Howard was like, how dare you? And I was like, well, first of all, Howard, I'm not sure you should be getting my children involved on the Stern show, because obviously it was our policy and practice never to talk about his children.
So tell me a little bit. I know a lot of people go and work there, and that becomes kind of what they are. But I mean, you've done so many things before and after. It's sort of just a part of your life. But tell me a little bit about just being a reporter. This whole journalism media thing is changing. The press conferences at the White House are just so combative, and it seems like that's the way the journalism is. Tell me, I feel like you really want journalism to stay journalistic, and there's a lot of people that just want to be entertainers and get their face and their hair cut and be on TV. Tell me your thoughts on what's going on in 2020 with just journalism in general, and where you see it going. Hopefully we can rebound and turn it around and get some actual journalistic stories out there again, right? I mean, am I right about what I'm kind of getting at here?
Well, look, I'm not a purist. I'm not the wire service reporter for the AP. I mean, I believe that radio or television news should be compelling. It has to be big and passionate. So, I started out in Canada. I worked in France for 3 years. I've worked all over this country, radio and television. But, the fact that news is a little crazier these days, obviously the subject matter is crazy. So you have to report it. I mean, people complain about it. And why are reporters in Washington covering circus? Well, because the circus is there and it's taken over our government in many respects. So you have to cover the news. Since when would you not cover that?
Are you a lifer? Is this something you do till they take the money?
It's the only thing I know how to do. That's the only thing I've ever done, and I like it.
So you love what you're doing now. Again, it's online. Where can people see you? And if they're people love Steve Langford.
Newsday.com. Yeah, Newsday.com, and it's basically stories that happen on Long Island. But I like that they give me a certain freedom to report it. Basically, the style has always been the same, and that even when I worked at the Stern Show, I just covered the news. I just covered the story, and my style did not change there, and it hasn't changed, and it wasn't different before that. It's always the same.
Doing the news.
I hope you can still see me. I'm back.
Yeah, no, I was just saying thank you because I loved that show, and to me, it was a big part of it. Like when you'd come in and you had your own song, probably won't sing it here, but it makes you laugh, and that's a good song to have kind of be your song, right?
It was. I was, when Howard first confronted me on the air with that, I immediately denied that it was true. Of course, only I would do that. But Stal and Richard immediately made a jingle, and Howard played that jingle every single time I went in the studio.
Well, I would take that jingle, and if you haven't heard it, then you're not a Stern fan, but it's a wonderful jingle. I thank Steve Langford for joining me. This has really been an honor. I appreciate his time. And again, Masses Restaurant's my sponsor, stlmasses.com. You can go to that website, find their menus here in St. Louis. If you're watching around the world, dip in through St. Louis, and they'll get you set up. Tell them you saw Here's the Pitch with Steve or any of the guests you've seen here before. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.